Steve and Judy had been looking forward to their trip to the Outer Banks of North Carolina for months. The long stretch of beaches, the wild dunes, and the serene ocean called to them like peaceful escape from their busy lives. They planned to take a ferry to one of the remote islands off the coast, and everything seemed perfect. As they arrived at the ferry dock, the air smelled of salt, the seagulls circled lazily overhead. They were excited for the adventure ahead, but as they approached the ticket booth, something didn't felt quite right. The man working the ferry gate had a rough, hillbilly look about him, unkempt, suspicious eyes, and a sour expression. Steve offered a friendly nod as they got closer, ready to buy their tickets. But before Steve could say a word, the attendant blocked their path, shaking his head, saying, "We don't cotton folks like you we don't cotton to folks like you. Y'all ain't from around here," he said gruffly. Judy blinked, taken aback. "What do you mean? What kind of folks do you cotton to?" The man's eyes narrowed as he leaned forward, looking at her square in the face. "You're a dumbass, aren't you?" he growled. Steve stepped forward after he stopped laughing and rolling on the ground, laughing so hard, with a protective instinct rising in him. He said, "What's the problem?" he asked firmly, refusing to be intimidated. The attendant leaned back, crossing his arms, said, "You need a 5-figure income to visit that island." He said, "Folks like you just won't fit in." Without missing a beat, Steve smirked, his voice steady. "Yeah, you're right about that. I got a 6-figure income." His words hung in the air for a moment, defiant and proud. But the attendant didn't budge. "Nah, ain't gonna happen," he muttered, refusing entry. "You ain't getting on this boat." Steve could feel the frustration building in his chest, but he knew there was no use arguing. He turned to Judy, nodding toward the car. "Come on, let's go." They left, their dream of peaceful island getaway tarnished by the stranger's strange hostility. But little did Steve know, this was just a small ripple compared to the storm that lay ahead in his life. He could have never imagined that this day, this small act of rejection, was a prelude to something much darker waiting in his future. Years passed, and things between Steve and Judy changed in subtle, unsettling ways. At first, Steve thought it was just a normal wear and tear of a long marriage. They'd been together for 29 years. But soon it became clear that Judy was becoming distant, emotionally cold, and unengaged. She tried to push aside the growing unease, convinced that they would weather it. Then, one evening, everything came crashing down. Judy sat across from him at their dining room table, looking more detached than ever. Her voice was calm, almost chilling when she said, "I'm leaving you." Steve did not flinch. He did not argue or beg. Something inside him already knew this day was coming. Instead, he leaned back in his chair, face expressionless. "That's fine with me," he said flatly. Judy, clearly caught off guard by his reaction, paused for a moment, but then she delivered the blow that she had been rehearsing for a long time. "I never really loved you, Steve. I was just using you for your money." The words hit him harder than he let on. For a moment he wanted to lash out, to say something that would hurt her as much as she hurt him, but instead he swallowed the pain and replied coolly, "Well, maybe that's what makes two of us." Judy stood up, grabbed her bags, and walked out the door without another word. In the months that followed, Steve realized just how much Judy had been scheming. She had not just left, she had taken everything. Bank accounts were drained, bills mounted, and soon Steve found himself on the verge of losing everything he had built. When the house was foreclosed on, Steve had no choice but to leave, with no job and nowhere to go. He spiraled into homelessness, spending 13 long, brutal years on the street. During those years, he replayed their final conversation countless times, feeling the weight of betrayal growing heavier and heavier. The woman he had loved for almost 3 decades had never genuinely loved him at all. She'd just been using him all along. But over time, the bitterness began to eat away at him. The resentment festered in his heart, poisoning every part of his life. And then, one day, something shifted. Steve realized that holding on to that anger was only hurting him. Judy had moved on without a second thought, but he was the one who remained stuck, trapped by his own pain. It took a long time, far longer than he wanted to admit, but Steve finally learned to let go. He forgave Judy. Not for her, but for himself. He realized if he did not forgive, he would never be able to move on. In the end, Steve made peace with his past. Judy had taken everything from him, his money, his home, his sense of security, but she could not take his ability to rebuild. Through all the hardships, Steve found strength and forgiveness. He learned that sometimes the only way to be truly free is to let go of the things that weigh you down, even if those things are people you once loved. And though the memories would always be there, Steve no longer lets them define him. Instead, they became a reminder of how far he has come now, and despite everything, he has survived.